Guys, our last exercise for tools of Photoshop, and I'm saving the longest one for last. I don't think it's very difficult. I just think it's going to take longer because you're going to be doing 7 tools for one exercise. Okay, and at the end of this, we're going to get a pumpkin face made out of fruits and vegetables. So I'm going to open the one called selection.psd. Okay, and so we have a lot of different selection tools over here in our toolbox. So I'm going to start with the easiest ones, and then we're just going to kind of progress to the ones that, I don't know if they're more difficult, they just have a little bit more properties to them that you can kind of play around with. So the first one I'm going to select is the rectangle marquee tool. So notice that these look like these dotted like shapes. And so when you see this dotted, that means that there is something selected. There's an actual active selection that was made. So I'm going to pick the rectangle one. And the key here is that if you actually select shift, so if I wanted to click and drag over something, notice that I'm making like rectangles here, versus if I hold down shift and click and drag, notice that it's making a perfect rectangle. So that's my first trick for you, is if you hold down shift, you can make a perfect selection with the ellipse and the rectangle marquee tool. And then notice that we get these dotted lines that are moving. Some people call them the marching ants, and that just means that is actively selective. At any time, if you want to unselect, Command D. Command D unselects. Okay, so I'm going to use the magnifying glass to zoom in to my apples, and I'm going to zoom out. I went a little bit too far. I'm going to hold down Shift, and I'm targeting the upper left hand corner. Okay, so that's perfect. It's selected. I'm going to hit Command 0 to back out. And then I'm going to use the Move tool up here to click and drag and bring the little slice of apple over to the ear of this pumpkin. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm going to take the magnifying glass and magnify this apple slice. I'm going to use the rectangular marquee tool. Again, I'm holding down shift and clicking and dragging over the apple. So it's selected. Command 0 to back out again. And I'm using the move tool to, so notice what happened was I did not unselect this one. So I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that move, and then I'm going to hit Command D to unselect. And I just got to make sure that I should have Command D'd before I started selecting this other one. So rectangle tool, shift, click and drag from the corner, Command 0, and now I'm going to use the move tool to move just that one. All right, I'm actually kind of glad that I did that because that might have happened to you guys. So now this one's still selective. It's actively selected. So Command D to unselect. Okay. The next one that I'm going to use is the elliptical tool. So that's right underneath the rectangle tool. So I'm going to select this, and I'm going to use the magnifying glass to click and drag in on the orange slice. So after selecting this, my tip for this one is I'm going to hold down shift so I get a perfect circle, but I actually want to pick from the very middle of, I want to select from the middle instead of, if I clicked and dragged, notice that I'm not going to get that perfect, it's going to be really hard to get that perfect circle from the outside, and I don't want to grab the other stuff. So I actually want to select it from the inside. So I'm going to hold down Shift and Alt Option, and what that lets me do is it lets me make a perfect circle, and the Alt option lets me choose from the center. Do you see how it's doing that? Yeah. All right, and so I'm going to go as far as I can to get as much as the orange slice selected. Command 0 to back up, and then I'm going to use the move tool to move this to the mouth of the pumpkin, and it's still actively selected, so Command D to unselect. All right. The next one we're going to move on to is called the Polygonal Lasso tool. So I'm not going to use the Lasso tool. The Lasso tool just lets you like click and drag to make a selection, but I've never really found that unless you want to make some kind of abstract, you know, shape with that. That's, useful. So we're going to move on to the Polygonal Lasso tool, which every time that I click, it's going to make a point. All right, and then if I go back to the very first point, it's going to close the selection and make it active. So Command D to unselect that. I'm going to zoom into these magnificent bow tie pasta, and I'm going to use the Polygonal Lasso tool to select this bow tie. So it's not going to do a spectacular job, okay? I'm not going to be able to get every single edge because this has curves to it, and notice that the Polygonal Lasso tool only lets you do harsh edges. So this is probably not the best tool to use for a shape like this, but I'm just showing you the difference that maybe you would actually end up using a different one, since if you did need to have these curves in here, you might end up using a different one because of the harsh angles that it selects with. So I'm just clicking, which is just making points, and I'm going in and out of the pasta, and I know that I'm missing some information. That's fine. I want it to just be more angular. And I'm going to go back to the very first point that I made it. Notice that we see what's called the Genesis point, that little 0 that says you're back to y equals 0, x equals 0. When I select it, it makes it an active selection. Command 0 to back up. And then I'm going to use the move tool to move the bow tie pasta right below his mouth here. Okay, Command D to unselect. Okay, so then the next one that I'm going to do is the magic wand tool. So we all get to be wizards here. And so it looks like a magic wand. It might be under the quick selection tool. And so the first thing I wanted to show you was tolerance up here. So you do have to set the tolerance before you actually make a selection. So the magic wand tool is really great for one color object. So actually sometimes I select something like this. It just selected this black area. It noticed it was all black and made that selection. So this is something kind of nice to actually, if you have a picture on a black background, you can actually select the black background and then say select inverse to only select, the object that's on the black background. So I'm going to use it for over here on this grape to select it. Now notice it didn't do such a great job. So let's see what happens if I change the tolerance down to like 10 and I select. Now notice it's selecting even less. I'm going to change it to 60 and actually try to select it. Notice that it actually selected more. So I'm going to zoom in and show you up close what it's selecting. So my tip here for you is make sure that you're aware of your tolerance, and then also you can hold down shift and select more areas. So all I had to do was click 3 times to select this entire grape. So again, be aware of your tolerance. Okay, the higher the number, the more like shades of that color it will pick. And then the other tip is if you hold down shift and click, you could add to the selection. Okay, Command 0 to back out. And then I'm going to use the move tool to move the nose above the orange slice right here. And Command D to unselect. Okay. The next one I'm going to use is it's underneath the magic wand. It's called the quick select tool. So when I select that, notice your options bar up here. Here lets me brush over something to make a selection. I can then add to that selection or subtract from that selection, and basically it's like a paintbrush that lets you actually like make a selection. So I'm going to change the size a little bit down here. You could also use the right curly bracket or the left curly bracket to make it smaller or bigger, so that's an option. So I'm going to zoom in on these 2 carrots with my magnifying glass, and I got my quick selection tool. It's set to like 18, and I'm just going to click and drag over, and notice that it did a pretty good job, but I need a little bit more and a little bit less. So I'm going to make this really small, and I want it to unselect kind of this right here, and I wanted to add a little bit over here. Okay, so that's looking pretty good to me. Oh, I'm going to add a little bit down here too. All right, so this lets you add, this lets you subtract from it. I might do a little less right here. Okay, Command 0, okay, to move the carrot's eyebrow. All right, and Command D to unselect. All right, and then I'm going to go over and do the same over here. I'm going to zoom in and use the quick selection tool. Make sure that it's just on this one right here. I'm going to start with about size 18 like I did last time, and click and drag over the carrot. Okay, and it kind of grabbed too much, not enough of other things, so I'm going to unselect some areas. And add to some other ones. And unselect. So it kind of like tries to do its best, you know. I should have probably done a little bit smaller. I'm going to add a little bit more here. And subtract a little bit. So you just have to be really patient when you're making selections. All right, I'm pretty happy with that. Command 0 to back up, and I'm going to move this over here. All right, so notice that it's not facing the right way. So I wanted to do this purposefully so that you guys knew that you could actually like rotate objects, okay? So I'm going to go to Edit, Transform, and Rotate. And it's going to let me rotate that selection. And then I'm going to hit Return and Command D. Okay, so that was Edit, Transform. So it was selected. It's not showing me, but it lets you kind of change the scale, the size of it, rotate it. So there's all these different options that you could do. You know, after you've actually made a selection, you can transform a lot of things. Okay. All right. The next one I'm going to get into is the magnetic lasso tool. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my kiwis here. So I'm going to zoom in. I went a little bit too far. All right, and I'm going to use the magnetic lasso tool. So this is underneath the polygonal lasso tool. And what I want to do is I'm going to click on the edge of it, and it's automatically going to try to go around all of this. Okay, and so I'm just clicking and I'm just slowly moving. I'm not clicking to make the points like the polygonal lasso tool. It's just trying to grab between the contrast of the white and the fuzzy brown of the edge. And I just recommend that you kind of just like move over it very slowly. And it's going to try to find the contrast between the edge of the object and the white background. So this really works well on a plain background. And then I'm going to go back to my very first point that I created. Notice the genesis point, x equals y equals y. When I click it, it makes it a selection. Command 0 to zoom out, and I'm going to use the move tool to move the kiwi for its eye. Command D to unselect. I'm going to do the same thing for the other kiwi. Now, something I want to make a note of is that some people like freak out because sometimes the RAM, it has a really hard time with the memory of its selecting. So at any time, if you really screw up, just hit enter and then command D to start again. So sometimes like your whole screen turns white and you're like, what's going on? And it's because it uses a lot of RAM to use this tool. So again, if you have any problems, just hit enter, which is going to make it a selection automatically, and then Command D to undo. All right, I'm going to go pretty quickly since we're doing a video here. You guys are going to go really slowly, so you get a much nicer edge than I have right here. I'm going back to the very beginning. Command 0, and I'm going to move this. Okay, perfecto. All right, and Command D to select. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to do is the mushroom with something called the pen tool. So I'm going to select the pen tool. It looks like the tip of an old calligraphic pen. And notice up here, I can either make a path or I can make a shape. So you want to make sure that it's on path, not shape. Otherwise, if you have it on shape, it's going to make a shape. So I'm going to select path, and then I'm going to zoom into my mushroom. Maybe for you kids, you guys might want to do your mushroom before your bow tie. So I'm just going to kind of go around it, and then we'll erase it later. So what I'm going to do is pick my pen tool, and I'm just going to click, and I'm going to click and drag to make it curvy. Okay, if I just went like this, all right, notice that it's actually making like angular. So I'm going to go Command Z to step back, and so if I click and drag, it's going to make things actually curve. And if you guys have been in design, you know that you're not supposed to have that many points. It actually doesn't matter for making a selection. And I'm going to go back to the very first point. And so notice I have this path. All right, I'm just going to show you that there is a path palette. It's showing you it there. And you could either fill this path, you could make it an outline, you could make it a selection, you could make it a mask. So I just wanted to make you aware of that. But up here in the options, I could just say I want to make it a mask, I want to make it a shape, I want to make it a selection. And it's going to say, you want to make a new selection? Yes. There we go. Command 0. And then I'm going to move this guy up to make a little hat for my pumpkin. And then Command D. Okay. Now you're probably like, what about all this stuff? It looks terrible. So I'm just going to use the paintbrush tool, and it's set to white. And I'm just going to make my paintbrush bigger by using the right curly bracket. And it's on a really it's not a hard edge, so I'm going to change it to a hard edge so that it's not really fuzzy. And then I'm just going to go around and, oof, that was terrible. Oh, I'm going to make that a little bit better. I'm going to zoom in, and I'm going to get rid of all the excess. Okay. So yes, this one was very lengthy, and I'm going to zoom in and clean that up. But at this point, this is looking pretty good, and you should have a little face at the end. When you've cleaned everything up, you're going to say File, Save As, and make sure you format it as a JPEG. And this one is first and last name _ selections. And now you've learned all the selection tools, the month, the day, the year, and then save. And you are done with all the exercises. You can now make it a contact sheet.